Now on PG Podcast Network, it's time for the Year-Round Carnival with Vince Accardi and your host, Racetrack Rolfie.
G'day, thanks for checking out Year-Round Carnival, where each and every Monday we have a good look at racing in Melbourne and Sydney and wherever there's really good racing going around. And at the moment, well, there's not that much good racing going around, is there? So what about we just talk about some really good horses? This week and next week, we're going to have a deep dive into what we'll call the IVR Horse of the Year, and we'll do it, of course, via Vince Accardi from Daily Sectionals. Good morning, mate.
Good morning, Ralphie. Yes, that's correct.
Oh, it's getting exciting with some good horses back trialling, and none better than Via Sistina. That's our horse of the year. What a huge shock to make Via Sistina the horse of the year. But let's start off by talking about this wonder mare of Chris Waller's, and that was a jaw dropper in the Cox Plate. 14.3 lengths above benchmark IVR. What type of horse is this? Because at the time when one broke the course record, the feeling was this is the next Winx.
Well, it's exactly that, isn't it?
Yeah.
In every aspect, when you really carefully think through a range of things, we've seen in the early days the adoption of this, supersonic slow pace. That was just the structure of races that it was in, and myself, and maybe others might have fallen into the possible trap that this is a runner that generates, huge performances with blistering closing speed, and that's its preferred style. But as we progressed, and then, like you said, the Winx style came out at the Cox Plate, because Winx was very similar in the early days, where fundamentally you wouldn't see these, giant early capability speed-wise, therefore tempering that overall performance figure. But we'd always see that big sprint, and then all of a sudden it loomed into a Cox Plate, and it had the capacity to do both. And this is exactly what we got with Via Sistina when it arrived at Cox Plate Day, that it had not only the capacity to completely reverse its style in terms of being able to cope with pace, it could also then produce unbelievable last 400 metres or 800 metres performances. I mean, that 11.9 above benchmark, where prior to that we were seeing typically anything between 6 lengths below and 20 lengths below, is unbelievable within itself. And then to be able to still reel off like 4.8 lengths above benchmark last 400 off that pace, you know you're in rare territory when you see that, because most horses can't break 4.8 lengths above benchmark off a benchmark speed. And yet this horse did it, and at 2,000 metres.
It was just insane. Let's have a listen to Matt Hill's call.
But Via Sistina storms away with 150 to go. She's 5 lengths in front. It's going to be a Cox Plate round, and James McDonald, a century of the very best. Via Sistina by 7 lengths.
Oh, Vince, so it was also James McDonald's 100th Group 1 at the time. We learned a couple of things, and as you said, it was the early speed that she produced. I think we learned something else, Vince, going forward, and that's something going to be really interesting with the Cox Plate, because Pride of Jenny set the tempo there, and Pride of Jenny had set the tempo the week before in that King Charles. So It was an insane tempo, which she does, and she's never been the same horse since. She won a couple of nondescript Caulfield races, but it's hard not to argue that gutted her ongoing. She ended up bleeding 2 weeks later. And why I'm asking that, Vince, in a broader sense, is that maybe we've seen the best of the Cox Plate, because now I don't think there'll be any stables keen to take on the Cox Plate after running in the King Charles in Sydney. So it's a real different dynamic that there's going to be horses targeted either at the King Charles or the Cox Plate. I don't think they're going to try and do both.
Yeah, so this is again another big challenge that we have to deal with into the future, and who's going to lure what horse where, and how do you prepare yourself? I mean, it seems to me, just on the surface, is the Cox Plate still seems to be like on the top of all the trainers' lips, but money's got a lot of power as well, hasn't it?
Yeah, no doubt. So she ended up with a 4.7 after that 14.3 in the Queen Elizabeth, just cruising around. And then she hit the Sydney Autumn Carnival. She peaked with 6.4 in the Queen Elizabeth. So what we can say is that at the moment, that Cox Plate's a mad outlier. She's officially 8, but I guess via European season, she's going to hit the Spring Carnival, technically a 7-year-old. Is it an outlier, or is it just that's the only time we've got to see her produce at her best when Chris Waller got her to peak?
Well, it is an outlier in this sense, Ralphie. I always like to go to the raw figures that if things are set up in a particular manner where it's just brutal pace from start to finish and you have a track that can endure that speed, right? In other words, have that quickness in the ground, then you're going to see a similar replication of that performance. But the outlier comes into play is that isn't the norm, and it's not what we typically see. In fact, it's the same as if you got into a superstar race and they all ran 30 lengths below benchmark. It's just not something that is common. There's always that 1, 2, or 5% chance that it could happen. So what I went through just to blend all that in, and this is now coming through that art and the prism of using the race matrix to give us a more blended structure and allowing us to say, okay, we know that the probability of that happening again is low. What does that all mean? Does that mean that we can establish a line? Well, we know if things are brutal, we can see this horse do plus 14s, but under normal circumstances, when I smooth it all out using the race matrix, it's sort of indicating that the range is probably at the top end, all things just being normal and a proper graph to work with is about 7.8 lengths or around the 8 mark is realistic. And then when I use that as the sort of blending number, I then just put every other horse up against that and say, okay, if we're using the same blending process, how does everybody else sit? And of course, it's not difficult for me to say to you, Ralphie, everybody else falls short.
Absolutely. So there's going to have to be a real 3-year-old emerge or an import or something like that, because at the moment she is just clearly top of the tree, no question at all. A horse that we won't see again, but we make this the 3-year-old sprinter of the year, and that was from his absolute dynamic performance Derby Day. It's Switzerland.
Switzerland right down the outside at the 150. Switzerland sprints hard, takes the lead, draws a length in front, 2 lengths in front. This is going to be dominant. Switzerland a big
And Vince, this was just brilliant sustained speed from Switzerland, and it's still worth talking about because what it showed me, we just spoke about Via Sistina with Chris Waller, and just what an absolute master strategist he is at getting horses to peak, and often he does it off a peak run. Just explain what he did in the spring from that Rosehill win and how big that Rosehill win was, but then it went again at Flemington.
Yeah, well, let's look at that run, like you said, Ralphie. First of all, plus 3.9. We look at that first average, 6.5 lengths below benchmark. Rocketed in the mid-race with a plus 11. Mind you, that was a peak for the horse. So between the 8 and the 4, it's gone 11 lengths faster than standard, virtually 2 seconds. And again, this elite structure then to be able to have the capacity to run 7.1 lengths above the standard for the last 400 metres, really putting itself in that dimension that if all things are on point, this is like a pretty powerful horse, and it was only 3. And then it went to Flemington, improved its overall IVR performance from plus 3.9 to 4.6. And you look at that first section, Ralphie, and the first section, the horse has gone virtually 7 lengths faster, which is a big switch up. Cope with it superbly, because when you look at the mid, even though the mid-race squeeze was nowhere near as much as the run prior, when I look at that 2S average, that's between the 8 and the 4, what the actual benchmark performance is, at Rosehill it was 4.5 above. Here it was 3.4 above, and going 7 lengths faster for 1 length less overall above benchmark profile. This can and has put many horses into a lot of difficulties when they get to the last 400 metres, that critical part of the race. Many of them just have big de-acceleration, not because of their conditioning, it's just their non-capability of being able then to maintain that high performance all the way to the finish line. And what we did see with Switzerland is it actually maintained that 3.4 above for the last 400 metres. No, the sprint wasn't as big as the last 400 on the start prior, but this is the impact when you're asked to go more than a second faster early. And we've seen the dominance get created again with the plus 4.6, and really, from the way I was looking at it, having that perfect step up, I was sitting back thinking, imagine what this horse is going to do next campaign. We could just see this horse going to the stratosphere, and it didn't quite deliver that beyond that victory. And I don't know why that happens, but the reality is this was a horse that I still believe until now we haven't seen the very best it can produce.
Well, unfortunately, never will. We're giving these guys a stud, but it actually, there's one big fundamental from that Rose Hill win, because we cheered him on big time on the preview podcast, Vince, when he won at Flemington, and that is the power of the mid race and an 11-length squeeze. So that's your measurement, and I'm going back probably to fundamentals for people trying to learn what we do here. The 11-length squeeze is a pickup in speed from the 800-metre mark to the 400-metre mark, and I remember the late great Dean Lester saying that's one innovation that you brought into racing, Vince, about the importance of a mid-race move, and to be able to improve 11 lengths in a 1,200-metre race. It's one thing in a staying race, but that's very, very rare. So that just genuinely told you this is a genuine talent and he's about to really produce big time.
Yeah, and you weren't like also in a situation where you got the 11-length squeeze, Ralphie, and you're going 15 lengths below benchmark, which is a small, tiny field in a 1,200-metre race. Maybe we could see that, right? But the reality is it was decent, the pace early, and to have that phenomenal move in the middle was massive. And then you look at this horse's profile, it's probably more like a 7 lengths, 6, 7 lengths mid-race squeeze off that sort of tenacious pace. And yet it went to a brand new sort of level and gave us that comfort that you are well above the standard.
I heard Wayne Hawkes on SEN Track earlier this year say the one thing with 3-year-olds, sometimes they feel that pain barrier for the first time when they're colts and they don't want to do it again. And maybe that was the case with this horse, that he felt it in the spring and he was a bit disinterested in the autumn, and bang, he's out to stud. And speaking of Team Hawkes, the older sprinter of the year we're giving to Briasa.
The great Briasa gets going inside the 200, overpass, a length clear from Briasa, breathing down his neck, overpass being tackled by Briasa the outside. Briasa goes to overpass, Briasa overpass, Briasa won the TJ.
And he absolutely peaked, Vince, in that TJ Smith. He was dynamic, and this is just one of those real climbers that Team Hawkes have got their hands on. What did he show you in the spring, and how big was his win in the TJ Smith?
Yeah, we can't help but not have this feeling of excitement around this horse, Ralphie. Surely we can't. We have to be excited. Firstly, just if I can just briefly touch on, Ralphie, the starting. Kembla Grange, minus 5.8. Peaking at Randwick on the 5th of the 4th with a plus 4. Look at the elevation in what, half a dozen runs? We've seen virtually a 10-length transition. That's massive, Ralphie. And then we break down and just look at the structure of the horse and its capability levels. The 1S that day when it produced the plus 4 at Randwick, 3 lengths below benchmark. Between the 8 and the 4 was plus 1.8. And one of the things that we do see a lot, Ralphie, with these elite horses is that monster capacity over the last 400 metres. And there was there on showcase, plus 6. Now, when I look at that in isolation, it virtually touched that once before at Randwick, going all the way back to the 5th of October in 24, when it produced a plus 5.9. The interesting things when you look at the evolution of the horse is, firstly, that day when it produced the plus 5.9 last 400, comparing it to that recent run at Randwick, it was 5.5 lengths slower first section and 3.5 lengths slower in the mid. and yet it produced the 5.9 versus the 6 off a completely different tempo, and really franking the evolution of the horse. And I sit back here and I'm wondering to myself, like, where is this horse headed to? Particularly from a stable that know how to handle high-profile horses.
Oh, no doubt. Well, he's second favourite for the Everest. What we'll do is a bit of a members bonus. I'm just thinking of this in the run, but I know you've clocked him. Car Ying Rising. We'll do the members bonus on Car Ying Rising. So if you want to be a member, go via my website, racetrackralphie.com.au, click through the links. And for our Group 1 members, each and every week we send them a little bonus podcast, and that can be part of it. We'll also have a quick look at Caulfield and Randwick from the weekend as part of our members bonus this week. And it's just going to be some absolute gold information going through the Spring Carnival leading in. Let's have a look at another of the categories here, Vince. And the Mile of the Year, well, this wasn't just Mile of the Year. This was Ride of the Year. Blake Shin, Antino, Toorak Handicap, Caulfield Guineas Day.
Antino, every poster winner at the 200 metres, 5 lengths in front of Desert Lightning, El Safina, followed by Craig, but it's all Antino. Blake Shin, take a bow from last to first, has bolted in, demolished them. Antino, 6 lengths.
And Vince, it was just absolutely stunning, and well-deserved premiership win to Blake Shin as well. I'll tell you what, though, we might have learnt something as well, because I remember during the year with regards to the trainer, Tony Goal, and you made the comment, this has proven that this guy has made the step up to being as good a Group 1 trainer as anyone anywhere in the country.
For sure, it did do that for me. It really solidified and took away any doubts that I would have lingering around that trainer and his capacity to be able to have him to peak on the right day. Well, he's done that in spades since anyway, so that's really good for me into the future. But realistically, also, the credit to the horse about like what it's been able to demonstrate and showcase, like the variation in performances. If I look at more recent times, Ralphie, we look at what it did back in October at Caulfield, over a mile, plus 5.9. And that day there, Ralphie, have a look at the breakdown. 1 length below benchmark early. Monster move in the mid-race. Going 8.7 lengths above benchmark. Yes, we did see a big de-acceleration over the last 400 metres, but it still broke benchmark after a whopping move in the middle. I felt that had a couple of key ingredients behind it, because if you look at the run before that, it was such high pressure. It's not easy for a horse to back up, especially when there's 6, Ralphie, right? To be able to then turn up at the subsequent start and be even more brutal than what they were the start before that. And then lastly, just I look at that Doomben run and I'm still in awe. I know we had the pace setter, if you want to call it.
What a Jenny.
Yeah, a class horse within itself, right? So probably not fair for me to just call it the pace setter. But the reality was it stretched Antino out to a plus 9.4 first section, which in its own is an outlier, but to be able to handle that early is just unbelievable, and still be running 3.4 lengths above benchmark until, between the 8 and the 4 before deteriorating. Just put another bow on the horse's capacity to be able to cope with a completely different race pace structure and deliver, and where everybody else just collapsed off that shape.
Well, he did. He dominated. So we started this pod talking about Via Sistina, and at this stage we're talking about Antino and his 3.3 in that Doomben Cup, and with a peak of 5.9. Putting it together, if he takes on Via Sistina in a Cox Plate, and we're just spitballing now for fun, 3 months out, what type of capacity do you think he could do at 2,000 metres?
Well, we've seen a 5.9 come from that Caulfield run back in October of 24. So surely that's got to be the real fit from our perspective. Now, have we seen horses improve, males improve when they sort of go from 6 to 7?
No.
No. So
it'd be an outlier of all outliers, I guess.
Yeah, but the reality is this, and this is the the Waller terminology, you really never know what a horse is capable of until they're tested.
That's true. That is true.
And sometimes they find another level that's not there or has never been seen before. So surely we've got to give that some consideration, because when I look at the raw figures is pre any adjustments, we can go as high as plus 11.7 with the horse, Ralphie.
Well, there's one other little wrinkle, which it's at the moment, we're in the middle of winter and we're picturing a fine spring. What if it's a wet Cox Plate? Because he bolted it at the Gold Coast and Viestastina failed on a wet track at Flemington last spring. Who knows?
Yeah, well, he certainly created the clarity that it's a superstar wet tracker as well.
What was his wet track indicator that day?
Well, plus 12.1 at Doomben, just unbelievable just on its own. Just 12.1, Ralphie. I mean,
and the Gold Coast?
21.9. But, Ralphie, the Gold Coast.
But anyway, he's a swimmer.
Yeah, he's a swimmer.
Okay, the stayer of the year. Well, I'm making it two categories: one from the spring, one from the autumn. And this one, it was a fantastic race to watch. It was a war in the Metropolitan between Land Legend and Zardozi.
It's Land Legend and Zardozi, the two protagonists in the Metropolitan. Land Legend and Zardozi, they knuckle out a great finish. Zardozi on the inside of Land Legend. Land Legend, Zardozi, nothing in this. Stride for stride, they hit the line. It's a bob of the...
And Land Legend got the bob of the head, Vince. Again, this was a Chris Waller masterclass in peaking in the grand final.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely that sort of horse. This is another horse, when you look at it and you try and understand what's its capacity, that Randwick run at 2,400 has to be the one, doesn't it, Ralphie? The plus 3.7, going close to benchmark early, minus 2.9, 4.6 above between the 8 and the 4, and then really, crystallising its staying capacity with a plus 5.8, actually improving its speed, which is amazing for me, because when I assess what it did in March over a mile, the blueprint of the last 800 was almost identical with 1,000 less metres. And that day at the 1,600 metres was almost 4 lengths slower early. So
this is behind Viestastina and Fangirl first up.
Yeah. So this demonstrated that the Bart Cummings story about when you want to know if you potentially have a really serious stayer, they have to be able to have the capacity to sprint dynamically. And did we not see this with this horse? And it's proven that that's exactly what this horse is capable of. The reality now is, where's this horse going, do you feel, Ralphie, coming up to the spring?
Well, this is part of the art, isn't it? So I just love watching what traders do and how they think. So let me put this to you, and then see if this theory holds, what you're thinking of it. So Land Legend, I remember watching these fantastic videos that he puts out during the week, and the horse had yet to run first up, but he won it his only Australian start, which was the previous spring, and Chris said, I really like this horse. We're not going to see much yet early, but I really like this horse. And he wins the grand final in the Metrop, third in the Caulfield Cup, well beaten, and tapers from there. I can't help think, and you mentioned Bart Cummings, that it was a Bart Cummings cameo, 3 runs in the autumn, and then this time he'll be sole focused at a Melbourne Cup.
Yeah. Wow. That's pretty exciting, isn't it? That's very, very exciting.
Do you think he would have the capacity on what you saw in that 3.7 in the Metrop?
Has to off that setup, because, of course, the ground conditions on the day, the race shape, play factors and where you're drawn and all those sort of things. But realistically, just in the sustained nature of pressure, this has got that typical profile that you got sustained speed for 1,200 metres, and that's what you need.
So go on.
I'm sitting back here saying, well, if we've got a lockdown 3.7, what does that mean? It means that we already know that's like in the realm of what you need to be extremely competitive in a Melbourne Cup. If you can bring that number to 32, and then you look at that art form of sustained 1,200 metres, why not?
Well, I'm just thinking this on the run, Vince, but he had Bob Zardozi, who then ran a terrific fourth in the Melbourne Cup. Arguably should have finished closer with
Yes.
with a different a non-fly-in fly-out rider. Do you know where Zardozi's going now? She's
No?
now Kieran Maher.
Really?
So with James Cummings now going to, they're putting their good horses, various trainers. Kieran Maher, Zardozi this spring. I can't help thinking it's going to run a mighty race in the Melbourne Cup with a decent prep, because last prep, of course, they had to give her that run at Flemington over the mile on Derby Day, which was not ideal. So I just wonder. It's pretty exciting too.
It is. That is very, very exciting. So it just really sort of franks about, like, we've still got some superstars in the country, haven't we?
Oh, no doubt. Well, and one of them was it was a jaw dropper what he did, the old boy on in the Sydney Cup. We're talking about Arapaho, and Rachel King did the rest.
But Arapaho dashes clear. It's Arapaho 2, 3 lengths in front of the Sydney Cup. Oh, Arapaho. Well, second crack at the Sydney Cup, and today's the day. Arapaho, a big winner.
And Vince, it was a stunning ride, stunning performance. What type of performance did Arapaho did? Because I wanted to give him dead heat in the horse in the Stayer of the Year, because that was just an obliteration. And as you always say, it's harder to produce a good figure at 3,200 compared to 2,400.
Yeah, and this is the beauty when we look at it from that lens. The overall performance plus 2.4. Again, in the strike zone of a Melbourne Cup, right? Because you're looking at a variation of a couple of lengths, and that can easily come to you in your favour if the first section, and that's that race shape through the first half of the race, isn't as brutal as what this horse had to endure, plus 5.2. I mean, that's fantastic. And then still break benchmark for the last 800 metres right across the board. A little bit of a slowdown that day at 3,200 metres from inside the 6th to the 2, which I also feel that if you went all out, you could probably tack back on a length. And then what does that look like if the horse has an overall IVR score of 3.4?
It's well, why not? I mean, we always say with older horses, they can get to the veteran stage, but until they show a sign of dropping off, don't drop off them, because they maintain their figures.
No, we had a number of international horses that were just targeted purely at Melbourne Cups, and they were, very old, like
9s and 10s, yep.
That's right, and delivered to their previous seasons of performances. So it's all going to come back down to how many starts will they give the horse, and are they going to also target the Melbourne Cup?
I dare say they would. Well, why wouldn't you? They're 10 million now this year, and they're paying the 24th. So.
10 million. Wow.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, I'm going to do 6 more categories next week. There's some really exciting 3-year-olds on the rise, and some of those that are just from different states as well. So we always love talking about good racing. Like I said, members bonus this week will be Kaying Rising, and we'll have a quick look at Randwick and Caulfield. A couple of little nuggets that hopefully we can find out as horses to follow. All that audio that we've heard so far, of course, courtesy of racing.com and Sky Racing. In the meantime, thanks so much for listening to Year-Round Carnival.